Waves crash and sunlight glints. Safe, until it's not. Beneath the surface, sharks glide like shadows, unseen until the last second. Not hunting, but when paths cross, instinct takes over. For swimmers and surfers, one wrong moment can change everything. From surfers dragged beneath the waves to divers ambushed in the deep, in this video we'll explore 6 gripping shark encounters where routine adventures suddenly became battles to make it back to shore alive. Off the rugged, windswept coast of South Africa near Cape Town on May 1, 2025, what was supposed to be groundbreaking television entertainment turned into a horrifying ordeal that would change the lives of everyone involved. The location had been specifically chosen for its dramatic landscape and challenging waters, an area known locally as Shark Alley, due to its high concentration of marine predators. For decades, this stretch of coastline had attracted thrill-seekers and researchers alike, drawn by the notorious presence of great white sharks that patrolled these waters in search of the local seal colonies. The Russian production company Extreme Media had spared no expense in setting up their latest venture, a high-stakes reality competition called Survival Ocean's Edge. 10 contestants from across Eastern Europe had been selected after rigorous auditions, each believing they would return home with fame and fortune. The show's premise involved increasingly dangerous underwater challenges, with the final prize of 2 million rubles awaiting the ultimate victor. Producer Alexei Volkov had insisted on authenticity, rejecting safety measures proposed by local marine experts. When marine safety consultant Thabo Mbeki suggested postponing filming due to increased shark activity that week, Volkov had dismissed the concerns, claiming that danger was precisely what would boost ratings. The production team had obtained permits through questionable channels, bypassing several crucial safety regulations in the process. The contestants, 5 men and 5 women, had been preparing for the underwater obstacle course all morning. As the afternoon sun reached its peak, they plunged into the cold Atlantic waters, unaware of the danger lurking beneath the surface. Camera operators in wetsuits followed, capturing every moment of what was about to unfold. Contestant Natalia Kuznetsova was the first to notice something wrong. A massive shadow glided beneath her, moving with purpose and precision. Before she could alert the others, the water erupted in a violent explosion of white foam and thrashing limbs. A 6-meter great white shark, drawn by the unusual activity in the contestants' bright wetsuits, had launched its first exploratory bite, clamping down on contestant Viktor Petrov's leg with devastating force. Panic spread through the group like wildfire. The shark, seemingly agitated by the commotion, began circling the terrified contestants as they frantically tried to reach the safety boat anchored 50 meters away. Producer Volkov, watching from the deck, initially believed the chaos was excellent footage, not realizing the genuine horror unfolding before his eyes. The predator struck again, this time targeting contestant Olga Ivanova, who had become separated from the group. The shark's powerful jaws closed around her arm, dragging her underwater momentarily before releasing her. Blood spread through the water, creating a slick that only intensified the shark's aggressive behavior. Nearby fishermen from the village of Gansbai, who had been watching the production with disapproval, immediately sprang into action when they realized what was happening. Captain Johan van der Merwe and his crew rushed their boat toward the scene, throwing life preservers and pulling contestants from the water as the shark continued its relentless assault. The rescue was chaotic and desperate. One by one, the bloodied contestants were hauled aboard the fishing vessel and the production boat. Miraculously, all 10 survived the initial attack, though 8 suffered injuries ranging from minor lacerations to severe trauma. Viktor Petrov and Olga Ivanova sustained the most serious wounds, requiring immediate emergency evacuation to a hospital in Cape Town. In the aftermath, as medical teams worked frantically to save the victims, the full impact of the disaster began to emerge. The show was immediately canceled, and investigations were launched into multiple violations of marine safety protocols. Producer Volkov faced criminal charges for negligence and endangering lives, while the production company found itself battling lawsuits from all 10 contestants and their families. The incident sparked global outrage and renewed debates about the ethics of reality television and the exploitation of dangerous natural environments for entertainment. Marine conservation groups used the disaster to highlight the need for respecting shark territories and understanding that these apex predators were not villains, but animals behaving according to their nature in waters humans had invaded. For the survivors, the psychological scars ran deeper than their physical wounds. Natalia Kuznetsova became an outspoken advocate for shark conservation, arguing that the blame lay entirely with the production company's recklessness. Viktor Petrov, after 6 surgeries to reconstruct his leg, established a foundation dedicated to promoting responsible marine filming practices. The reality show Nightmare served as a sobering reminder of humanity's hubris when facing the raw power of nature. While no lives were lost that day, something fundamental had changed in how the entertainment industry approached wildlife encounters. The haunting image of terrified contestants fighting for their lives in blood-stained waters became an enduring symbol of what happens when the quest for ratings overrides respect for nature's most formidable predators. The waters off Cape Town eventually returned to their natural rhythms, the Great White continuing its ancient patrol long after the cameras and chaos had departed, indifferent to the brief human drama that had unfolded in its domain. The wind whipped violently across Cape Cod Bay, Massachusetts, creating perfect conditions for experienced windsurfers on the afternoon of August 12, 2022. This particular stretch of the Atlantic coastline had long been a paradise for watersports enthusiasts. With its reliable winds and stunning vistas of the historic peninsula, the area had seen increasing shark activity over the previous decade as seal populations rebounded, creating a natural draw for oceanic predators returning to their ancestral hunting grounds. Sarah Mitchell, a 35-year-old corporate attorney from Boston, was no stranger to these waters. She had been windsurfing for over 15 years, using the sport as an escape from her high-pressure career. Her friends often remarked that she seemed more at home on the water than in any courtroom, and Sarah had developed a reputation among local windsurfers for her fearlessness in challenging conditions. This weekend marked her 10th annual solo retreat to Cape Cod, a tradition she maintained religiously despite her busy schedule. The day had begun perfectly. Clear skies, strong winds, and relatively few tourists as the summer season wound down. Sarah had spent the morning riding impressively large swells, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline as she navigated her board across the churning surface. By mid-afternoon, most recreational beachgoers had departed as the wind intensified, leaving Sarah with an expansive playground all to herself. It was just after 3:30 p.m. when Sarah noticed something unusual. Despite the strong winds propelling her sail, a peculiar stillness had settled over one section of water about half a mile from shore. Having grown up near the ocean, she recognized this as potentially significant. Predators often created such disturbances in their wake. Still, she continued her course, adjusting her board to investigate this anomaly with the curiosity that had served her well in her legal career. The attack came without warning. A massive tiger shark, estimated later to be nearly 12 feet long, struck from directly beneath Sarah's board with explosive force. The impact launched her 6 feet into the air before she crashed back into the churning foam. Marine biologists would later suggest the shark had likely mistaken the silhouette of her board and sail for a large sea turtle, one of the tiger shark's preferred prey items. Finding herself suddenly in the water, Sarah's training kicked in. She attempted to climb back onto her board, but the shark circled back, its distinctive tiger-striped pattern visible just beneath the surface. With devastating power, the predator clamped its jaws around her right leg, the serrated teeth slicing through her wetsuit and into flesh and muscle. Sarah's response was instinctive and potentially life-saving. Rather than pulling away, which might have caused the shark to bite down harder, she kicked forcefully at the shark's sensitive gill area with her free leg. The shark released her momentarily, seemingly confused by this unexpected resistance. In that critical moment, Sarah thrashed and created as much disturbance as possible, knowing that sharks often preferred stealth and surprise over prolonged confrontation. The strategy bought precious seconds as the shark retreated temporarily, circling wider but still dangerously present. Blood was now spreading through the water, a dire development that Sarah knew could trigger a feeding response. With determination born of survival instinct, she pulled herself onto her board despite excruciating pain, using the sail boom as leverage. Her salvation appeared in the form of the Seaside Wanderer, a small charter fishing boat operated by Captain Elijah Thornton. The captain had been observing Sarah's impressive windsurfing through binoculars and witnessed the violent attack. He immediately redirected his vessel, racing toward the injured windsurfer while instructing his two passengers to prepare the first aid kit. As the boat approached, the shark made one final pass, bumping the underside of Sarah's board before disappearing into deeper water. Captain Thornton and his passengers managed to pull Sarah aboard, applying pressure to her severely lacerated leg while radioing the Coast Guard for emergency assistance. The injury was severe, multiple lacerations to her right thigh and calf with significant tissue damage and blood loss. A Coast Guard helicopter evacuated Sarah to a general hospital in Boston, where she underwent 7 hours of surgery to repair damaged blood vessels, nerves, and muscle tissue. The attending physicians noted that the attack had narrowly missed her femoral artery by just a few centimeters, an outcome that could have been the difference between life and death. Recovery proved arduous. Sarah endured 4 additional surgeries over the next 18 months and countless hours of physical therapy. The psychological impact ran even deeper than her physical wounds, with post-traumatic stress manifesting in nightmares and a newfound fear of open water that she had never experienced before. In an unexpected turn, the trauma ultimately reshaped Sarah's life in profound ways. During her recovery, she connected with a marine conservation group focused on shark research and protection. Despite her ordeal, or perhaps because of it, Sarah became fascinated by these predators and the crucial role they played in ocean ecosystems. She eventually reduced her legal practice to part-time status, dedicating her considerable skills instead to environmental law with a focus on marine protection initiatives. 3 years after the attack, Sarah stunned her friends by returning to the water, though she exchanged her windsurfer for a kayak and remained in shallower waters. She attributed her recovery to a determination to understand rather than fear the creature that had nearly taken her life. The incident was officially recorded as the third tiger shark attack in Cape Cod history, an anomaly that marine biologists attributed to warming ocean temperatures, pushing these traditionally more tropical predators further north. For Sarah Mitchell, the attack became not an endpoint but a turning point, a violent introduction to a cause that would ultimately give her life new purpose and direction. The coastal town of Port Elizabeth, South Africa, had long been known for its pristine beaches and spectacular marine life. In January of 2017, its waters would become the setting for a tragedy that would leave an indelible mark on the local community and a visiting American family. Port Elizabeth's shores, where the warm Indian Ocean currents meet cooler Atlantic waters, had created a diverse marine ecosystem that attracted both tourists and predators alike. For decades, the area had employed shark spotters and installed protective nets at popular swimming beaches, but the remote stretches of coastline remained wild and largely unprotected. Sarah Delaney, a 36-year-old pharmaceutical researcher from Minneapolis, had been planning the South African vacation for years. Her husband Matheson and their 2 children, 11-year-old Eliza and 9-year-old Finley, had been captivated by Sarah's detailed itinerary of wildlife safaris and coastal adventures. Sarah herself had been a collegiate swimmer at Stanford University, maintaining her passion for open water swimming well into adulthood. The family had chosen to stay at the secluded Sunset Lodge, specifically for its proximity to less crowded beaches, where Sarah could indulge in her morning swims away from the tourist crowds. The morning of January 17th began like the others during their stay, with clear skies and moderate temperatures perfect for beach activities. Breakfast on the lodge's terrace had been filled with excitement as they planned their day. Sarah had mentioned her intention to swim beyond the small cove in front of their accommodation to explore the adjacent bay, known locally as Dolphin Point, for the pods frequently seen offshore. The beach was not one of Port Elizabeth's designated swimming areas, lacking both lifeguards and shark nets, but its isolation was precisely what had attracted Sarah. Lodge manager Thembinkosi Naidu had cautiously advised against swimming alone, especially beyond the sheltered cove. He had mentioned increased shark sightings in recent weeks following unusual whale activity offshore. Sarah had acknowledged his concerns but assured him that she would remain relatively close to shore. Her confidence was understandable. She had completed several open water races and prided herself on her ocean awareness. At approximately 10:15 a.m., Sarah entered the water while her family set up their beach gear on the shore. Matheson later recounted how he had watched her strong practice strokes as she cut through the gentle swells. The children had waved enthusiastically as their mother swam past the protective embrace of the cove, and around the rocky outcropping that separated it from the larger bay beyond. 20 minutes into her swim, Sarah had ventured approximately 100 meters from shore, farther than she had intended but still within what she considered her safety zone. Unknown to her, a 4.5-meter great white shark had been patrolling these waters since dawn, attracted by a seal colony on the offshore rocks. Marine biologists would later hypothesize that the shark, following natural hunting patterns, had misidentified Sarah's black wetsuit and swimming motions as those of a seal. The attack occurred with devastating swiftness. Matheson, who had been helping the children build a sandcastle, glanced up just in time to see a violent disturbance in the water where Sarah had been swimming seconds before. A dark shape breached the surface momentarily, and Sarah disappeared beneath an explosion of white water. Her scream carried briefly across the bay before being cut terribly short. Matheson reacted immediately, instructing the children to run back to the lodge for help while he sprinted to the water's edge. His desperate shouts alerted two local fishermen, Vuyo Mandela and Peter Van Wyck, who had been preparing their small boat nearby. The men quickly launched their vessel and headed toward the site of the attack. But by the time they reached the area, all that remained was an expanding slick of red on the water's surface. The following hours unfolded in a blur of emergency services, police interviews, and the heart-wrenching task of sheltering the children from the full horror of what had occurred. The South African Maritime Rescue Coordination Center dispatched boats and a helicopter to search for Sarah, but as daylight faded into evening, hope diminished accordingly. Her body was never recovered, presumably taken by the strong offshore currents that characterized this stretch of coastline. The attack generated international headlines and renewed debate about shark culling, a practice largely abandoned in South African waters due to conservation concerns. Local marine authorities emphasized that such incidents remained exceedingly rare, with this being only the third fatal shark attack in the area in 20 years. For the Delaney family, the tragedy reshaped their existence in ways they could never have imagined. Matheson established the Sarah Delaney Ocean Safety Foundation, which worked to improve emergency response protocols for remote beaches worldwide, while simultaneously supporting shark conservation efforts. He insisted that understanding these creatures, not demonizing them, would be Sarah's preferred legacy. The children processed their grief differently. Eliza channeled her mother's passion for water by eventually becoming a marine biologist, specializing in predator behavior. Finley developed an intense fear of the ocean that took years of therapy to address, but ultimately found healing through creating a documentary about his mother's life and her love for the water that ultimately claimed her. Port Elizabeth's tourism industry implemented stricter safety protocols following the incident, with additional shark spotters stationed at previously unmonitored beaches and improved warning systems. Sunset Lodge installed a memorial plaque that served as both a tribute to Sarah and a reminder to visitors about respecting the ocean's wild nature. The last swim of Sarah Delaney became part of local lore, a sobering reminder that despite humanity's technological advances, nature retained its primordial power. In the waters off Port Elizabeth, great white sharks continued their ancient patrol, vital predators in an ecosystem that had functioned for millions of years before humans entered the picture and would continue long after these temporary visitors departed. Monterey Bay, California, had long been celebrated for its rich marine biodiversity and stunning coastal landscapes. In the summer of 2023, its waters would become the stage for a tragedy that would forever change how locals viewed their relationship with the ocean. The bay's unique underwater canyon system created upwellings of nutrient-rich water that supported an extraordinary food chain, from microscopic plankton to massive marine mammals. This same abundance also attracted various shark species, including great whites that patrolled the deeper waters in search of seals and sea lions. Jake Matthews, a 27-year-old software engineer from San Jose, had grown up visiting Monterey Bay. His passion for extreme water sports had developed during his college years at the University of California, Santa Cruz, where weekends were dedicated to surfing, diving, and eventually wakeboarding. Despite his inland tech career, Jake maintained connections to the coastal community, particularly through his college friends who had remained in the area, running a small water sports rental and tour business. On July 15, 2023, Jake had joined his former roommates Zachary Dominguez and Taylor Westfield for a day of wakeboarding in the bay. The morning had been perfect, Moderate waves, clear visibility, and few other boats to disturb their runs. By early afternoon, they had ventured farther from shore than usual, drawn by the glassy conditions in the deeper waters approximately a mile offshore. The friends had taken turns being towed behind their 24-foot boat, performing increasingly ambitious jumps and tricks as the day progressed. What the group had not realized was that they had entered an area where a juvenile elephant seal colony had established itself on nearby rocks, creating a natural hunting ground for great white sharks. Marine researchers monitoring shark movements in the bay had observed increased activity that week, but had not yet updated their public advisories. Additionally, the boat's wake and the repetitive splashing of the wakeboard created underwater vibrations that marine biologists would later suggest had mimicked the signals of distressed prey. At approximately 3:40 p.m., Jake was midway through his third run of the afternoon. His friends reported that he had just completed an impressive aerial maneuver when the water behind him erupted violently. A massive great white shark, later estimated at 16 feet long, breached directly in Jake's landing zone. The predator's momentum carried both Jake and his board beneath the surface in a chaotic splash, visible even from the boat 80 feet away. Zachary immediately cut the boat's engine and reversed course while Taylor grabbed the rescue ring. Through the suddenly blood-tinged water, they glimpsed a horrifying scene. The shark had clamped its powerful jaws around Jake's torso and right leg, thrashing in the characteristic feeding motion that great whites employ to tear flesh from prey. Jake's wakeboard, still attached to his feet by the bindings, appeared to confuse the shark momentarily as the unusual object interfered with its attack pattern. In a desperate attempt to save their friend, Zachary and Taylor deployed emergency flares directly into the water while maneuvering the boat closer. The bright lights and chemical irritants temporarily disoriented the shark, causing it to release Jake and swim away from the disturbance. Using the boat hook and rescue ring, they managed to pull Jake's severely injured body from the water, immediately applying pressure to the catastrophic wounds that covered his lower body. Despite their frantic radio calls for emergency assistance and attempts at cardiopulmonary resuscitation, Jake had lost too much blood too quickly. By the time the Coast Guard helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, medical personnel could only confirm what Zachary and Taylor had already realized. Their friend had not survived the brutal attack. The medical examiner would later determine that the initial bite had severed Jake's femoral artery, leading to rapid and irreversible blood loss, even before the secondary trauma of being dragged underwater. The incident shook the Monterey Bay community to its core. As the first fatal shark attack in the area in over a decade, it sparked renewed debates about ocean safety and shark management. Local authorities temporarily closed several beaches, while marine researchers conducted aerial surveys to track shark movements. The data collected revealed an unusual concentration of great whites in the bay that summer, possibly related to shifting ocean temperatures that had altered the migration patterns of their prey. Jake's parents, Arnold and Patricia Matthews, channeled their grief into advocacy, establishing the Jake Matthews Marine Safety Initiative, which funded research into shark deterrent technologies for water sports enthusiasts. They steadfastly resisted calls for shark culling, insisting that education and awareness would better honor their son's love for the ocean. Zachary and Taylor struggled with survivors' guilt and post-traumatic stress in the aftermath. Their water sports business closed temporarily, but eventually reopened with a new focus on safety education. They implemented strict geographical boundaries for their tours, installed shark detection equipment on their boats, and required all clients to use electronic shark deterrent devices. Taylor eventually became certified as a marine safety instructor, incorporating her first-hand experience into courses for other water sports businesses along the California coast. The scientific community used the tragedy as an opportunity to improve public understanding of shark behavior. Researchers from the Monterey Bay Aquarium developed an enhanced monitoring system that tracked shark movements in real time, with data accessible through a mobile application for water users. This technology, partially funded by the Matthews Initiative, was credited with preventing several potential encounters in subsequent years. As time passed, Jake's story became part of local safety briefings, a sobering reminder of the wild nature that persisted beneath the bay's picturesque surface. In Monterey Bay, as in oceans worldwide, humans remained visitors in an environment where ancient predators continued their eternal hunt, indifferent to the temporary intrusions of those who skimmed across the surface of their domain. The Atlantic waters off the Outer Banks of North Carolina had long been known for their abundant fishing grounds and unpredictable temperament. In the pitch-black night of September 18, 2019, these waters would become the setting for an extraordinary encounter between man and one of the ocean's most formidable predators. The Outer Banks, a thin strip of barrier islands separating the Atlantic Ocean from the mainland, had been home to generations of commercial fishermen who braved its volatile conditions to harvest its bounty. The area was also notorious among marine biologists for its diverse shark population, particularly in the warm late summer months when various species followed migrating fish schools along the coast. James Thompson, a 42-year-old third-generation commercial fisherman, had spent his entire life on these waters. His weathered 36-foot trawler, the Caroline's Promise, named after his late wife, was a familiar sight to other local fishermen. James had developed a reputation for his willingness to work longer hours and venture farther from shore than most of his peers. A necessity after corporate fishing operations had depleted the easier-to-reach fishing grounds. His solitary nature had intensified following Caroline's death from cancer 5 years earlier, and he often chose to work alone despite the inherent risks. On this particular night, James had navigated approximately 12 miles offshore to reach what local fishermen called the Shelf, an underwater ridge where Atlantic croaker and sea bass congregated in significant numbers. The weather report had promised calm seas, and the night had indeed begun with an unusual stillness, the water's surface appearing almost glass-like under the three-quarter moon. By midnight, James had already collected a respectable haul and was in the process of retrieving his final net of the evening. The attack came without warning. A massive great white shark, later estimated to be approximately 15 feet long, rammed the vessel's starboard side with explosive force. The impact sent James sprawling across the deck, disorienting him momentarily as equipment crashed around him. Marine biologists would later theorize that the shark had likely been attracted by the electrical impulses from the boat's equipment and the vibrations of fish struggling in the nets, a combination that mimicked the signals of wounded prey in distress. Before James could fully regain his footing, the shark struck again, this time targeting the net full of fish being winched aboard. The powerful predator's momentum tore through the heavy-duty netting and dislodged the mechanical winch, which whipped violently across the deck. The metal equipment struck James directly in the shoulder, the impact throwing him overboard into the dark waters 15 feet below. The shock of sudden immersion in the cold Atlantic partially stunned James, but his lifetime on the water had instilled instinctive responses. He immediately oriented himself and began swimming toward the boat's outline against the night sky. The splash of his entry, however, had attracted the shark's attention. In the moonlight, James could make out the massive shadow circling between him and the vessel, its dorsal fin occasionally breaking the surface in a terrifying reminder of the creature's size. What followed was a desperate battle of wits between man and predator. James understood that panicked, erratic movements would only trigger the shark's predatory instinct. Instead, he began swimming with deliberate, measured strokes, avoiding splashing while keeping the shark in his peripheral vision. When the creature made its first investigatory approach, James waited until the last possible moment before changing direction sharply, a technique he had once read about in a marine safety manual, but never imagined having to employ. The shark circled increasingly tighter patterns around him, each pass bringing it closer to James's vulnerable form. His destination became not the boat, but a large commercial buoy approximately 50 yards away, marking underwater telecommunications cables. The floating object represented his only chance, a platform to climb above the water's surface and away from the persistent predator. The final approach to the buoy became a desperate race as the shark's behavior shifted from curiosity to more aggressive posturing. James could feel the displacement of water as the creature passed beneath him, close enough that its rough skin brushed against his leg. With one powerful lunge, he reached the buoy's metal ladder and pulled himself up, his hands slipping on the algae-covered rungs before finding purchase. The shark made one final pass, its tail slapping against the buoy's submerged portion, with enough force to vibrate the entire structure. For 3 hours, James clung to the buoy in the darkness, watching as the shark occasionally circled before eventually losing interest and disappearing into the depths. The night air chilled his wet clothes, bringing him dangerously close to hypothermia. His salvation came shortly after dawn, when the crew of a passing sport fishing vessel, the Marlin Hunter, spotted him waving frantically from his precarious perch. They quickly retrieved him, radioing the Coast Guard while providing first aid for his injured shoulder and mild hypothermia. James's abandoned boat was located later that day, still adrift with its engine running. The damage to its hull and the destroyed fishing net provided tangible evidence of his extraordinary story. Marine biologists from the North Carolina Coastal Studies Institute documented the incident, noting that while great white sharks were known to occasionally investigate boats, such aggressive interaction was extremely unusual and likely represented territorial behavior rather than predatory intent. The experience transformed James's relationship with the ocean, which had been his livelihood for decades. While he eventually returned to fishing, he never again worked alone and became an advocate for improved safety protocols among the commercial fishing community. He collaborated with marine researchers to develop better shark deterrent systems for fishing vessels and participated in educational programs about shark behavior for other fishermen. The Outer Banks fishing community nicknamed him Shark Thompson, a moniker he initially resisted but eventually embraced along with his role as an unofficial authority on shark encounters. The buoy that had saved his life became known locally as Thompson's Perch, a landmark that passing fishermen would acknowledge with a brief boat horn salute, a recognition of a night when the ancient dance between predator and prey had resulted, against all odds, in mutual survival. The tropical waters surrounding Queensland, Australia, had long been renowned for their spectacular coral formations and vibrant marine life. In April of 2020, these same waters would become the setting for a harrowing encounter that would test one woman's will to survive. The remote sections of the Great Barrier Reef's southern reaches had attracted serious divers for decades, offering pristine underwater landscapes relatively untouched by mass tourism. This particular region, known locally as the Labyrinth, featured complex coral formations and deep channels that created perfect habitats for a diverse array of marine species, including several varieties of sharks that patrolled the reef edges where it met deeper waters. Lisa Harris, a 29-year-old marine photographer from Melbourne, had built her reputation capturing the ethereal beauty of underwater environments around the world. Her distinctive photographic style, which emphasized the interplay of natural light and marine life, had been featured in numerous international publications. This expedition to Queensland's remote coral systems had been meticulously planned for months, aligning with the new moon to capture bioluminescent organisms thriving in total darkness. The diving expedition consisted of 4 experienced night divers led by local guide Xavier Robertson, who had been navigating these waters for over 20 years. The other team members included marine biologists Amara Singh and Theo Nakamura, both colleagues of Lisa from previous research expeditions. All were experienced with night diving protocols and had completed a thorough safety briefing before entering the water from their chartered vessel, the Poseidon's Reach, anchored half a mile from the dive site. The night of April 7th offered perfect conditions, minimal surface chop, excellent visibility by torchlight, and a profusion of active marine life responding to the darkness. The dive plan included a careful exploration of a coral canyon that descended to approximately 25 meters, with strict instructions to maintain buddy contact and regular communication. For 40 minutes, the dive progressed flawlessly, with Lisa documenting remarkable bioluminescent displays and the nocturnal hunting behaviors of smaller reef predators. It was during the team's gradual ascent along the canyon wall that disaster struck. Lisa had momentarily separated from her buddy, Amara, to photograph a particularly vibrant coral formation. The powerful strobes from her underwater camera equipment created brief but intense bursts of light that illuminated sections of the reef before returning everything to darkness. What the divers didn't realize was that these disorienting flashes of light had attracted the attention of a 3-meter bull shark patrolling the deeper water beyond the reef. Bull sharks were known among marine biologists for their territorial aggression and ability to tolerate both saltwater and freshwater environments. This particular specimen had likely been drawn by the combination of artificial light and the electrical impulses from the camera equipment, which mimicked the signals of wounded prey. As Lisa adjusted her position to capture a low-angle shot, she felt a sudden, powerful impact against her side. The initial strike knocked her camera rig from her hands and sent her tumbling against the coral wall. In the confusion that followed, Lisa only gradually realized what was happening. The shark had clamped onto her lower leg and was beginning to drag her toward deeper water. The pressure was initially more shocking than painful, adrenaline temporarily masking the severity of her injury. Her training as an experienced diver proved crucial in these first critical moments. Rather than panicking and fighting against the pull, which would have increased the shark's predatory response, Lisa maintained control of her breathing and reached for the dive knife strapped to her calf. Amara, having noticed Lisa's absence, had already initiated a search pattern and witnessed the attack in progress. She immediately activated her emergency signaling device, alerting the rest of the team while rapidly approaching the struggling diver and predator. The shark, now engaged in what marine biologists call a test bite phase, maintained its grip on Lisa's leg while assessing whether she represented suitable prey. Guide Xavier Robertson responded with practiced efficiency, deploying an emergency shark deterrent flare directly into the water between Lisa and the shark. The magnesium-based flare burned underwater, creating an intense light and chemical irritant that momentarily disoriented the predator. In that crucial moment of confusion, the shark released its grip and retreated into the darkness beyond the reef edge. The team executed an emergency ascent, carefully controlling their buoyancy to avoid the additional dangers of decompression sickness. Lisa remained conscious throughout, though increasingly aware of the searing pain and blood loss from her mangled lower leg. Once on the surface, the team worked with practiced coordination to get her aboard the waiting vessel, where emergency medical protocols were immediately implemented. The boat captain, Duncan Mackenzie, had already radioed for emergency evacuation, while the onboard medic, Siobhan O'Malley, worked to stabilize Lisa's condition. The shark's powerful jaws had caused significant damage, lacerating muscle tissue and partially fracturing her fibula, but remarkably had missed the major arteries that would have resulted in fatal blood loss. The Australian Maritime Safety Authority dispatched a rescue helicopter, which reached their position within 40 minutes, a remarkably quick response given their remote location. Lisa was airlifted to one of the largest hospitals in Queensland, where she underwent emergency surgery to repair the extensive damage to her leg. The surgical team, led by Dr. Rashida Patel, performed microvascular reconstructive procedures that would ultimately save her limb, though the recovery process would involve 6 additional surgeries over the next 18 months. The physical rehabilitation proved grueling, with Lisa having to relearn basic mobility through intensive therapy sessions. The psychological impact of the attack presented an equally challenging recovery path. Lisa experienced severe post-traumatic stress symptoms, including nightmares and panic attacks triggered by water-related stimuli. Through specialized therapy, she gradually processed the trauma, eventually finding a way to integrate the experience into her understanding of marine environments and the inherent risks of her profession. In a development that surprised many, Lisa returned to underwater photography 14 months after the attack. Though she no longer participated in night dives, her first post-recovery project focused specifically on shark conservation, using her personal experience to advocate for a better understanding of these apex predators rather than demonizing them. Her photo series, Predator and Prey, received international acclaim for its nuanced portrayal of sharks as neither villains nor misunderstood pets, but as essential components of healthy marine ecosystems. The incident led to improved safety protocols for night diving operations throughout Queensland, including mandatory shark deterrent equipment and enhanced communication systems. Xavier Robertson used the experience to develop specialized training programs for dive guides on predator recognition and emergency response, which were eventually adopted by diving associations across Australia. For Lisa Harris, the attack became not an ending, but a pivotal moment in her career and life perspective. Her subsequent work carried a deeper appreciation for the fragile balance between humans and the natural world they temporarily entered. The scars on her leg served as a permanent reminder of a night when ancient predator and modern human had briefly and violently intersected, and both had survived to continue their separate journeys.